The margin schedule is one of the best features of BidUnity because it allows you to strategize at an organizational level. And before we dive too deep into an explanation of, what this is and how to take full advantage of it, just want to point out how it's used by the software. Okay, so we have a default margin that's going to apply whenever there is not a defined range. So in this case, we have defined cost ranges anywhere from 0 to 300,000. A project in excess of 300,000, it's going to get assigned the default margin. We also have a minimum margin. So your estimator will not be able to sell a project for less than the minimum margin. Then we have these ranges, okay? If a project costs, the cost of performance falls between $0 and $10,000, then the recommended margin would become 52%. And let me show you what that looks like. I created a proposal. It looks like it costs $5,060 to complete. So the recommended margin then becomes 52%. When this page originally loads, it's going to have a margin of 52%. Now your estimators can change this. Let's say they want to try and sell the job a little bit more competitively. That'll reduce the cost. Maybe we can go down to 20% and give the job to our friend. Can't do it. It's that minimum margin, right? Minimum margin, it's going to constrain the least value that we can put in here. So if we go with the 26%, the lowest price that we'll be able to quote is just under 7,000. But now that you understand, it becomes a recommended margin that the estimator can override, simply as I just demonstrated. Your minimum margin is going to constrain that smallest amount. So how do you create these? Well, you're going to add margin. So let's say we want to make a 45% on a project that costs 300,000 to $1 million. Boy, wouldn't that be nice? Simply save it, and we have added to the cost. Now, the default margin would be applied only when the cost basis exceeds $1 million. We can just as well delete that. But what I can tell you about how useful this has been for our experience, we've managed to zero in on the market price, if you will. Just kind of keeping track of the proportion of winning bids to losing bids. We're able to figure out if we're not winning a sufficient number of bids at a different project size, then cutting the margin from whatever value it happens to be. Cutting the margin, we get a little bit more, activity, and we just continue to adjust them until we're satisfied with the proportion of jobs that we're winning at that range. And you'll also notice that the margin is reducing as the size of the project is increasing. And that's because if you sell a small job, you need to mark it up a little bit more to cover the cost of administration. As a proportion of the total project size, those administration costs are going to be a higher percentage of. Whereas if you're selling a larger project, those administrative expenses are going to be reduced as a percentage of the total value. But it's been a pretty useful tool for us because it gives us a benchmark. And if we continue to, bid relative to that benchmark, we can make informed choices, increasing or decreasing the margin as we go. in order to regulate the amount of new business and work that we're taking on. So I hope that you found this helpful, and I hope that you have good success in using this for your business.